The antidote to digital distraction and to digital depression is getting addicted to books. That's my argument today. It's the antidote to screen addiction. Phineas Gage was a railroad worker in the 1800s. He was living in Vermont, and to break through a boulder to build these railroads, you had to drill down into the boulder, put some gunpowder in there, put some sand on top of that. So it's like about that deep, let's say. And then you sort of push it in, pound it in with this metal rod. And there's a fuse. And then when it's all pounded in, you light the fuse and you blow it up and you blow up the boulder. And then you could put your train through that mountain or that boulder. Well, Phineas was distracted at one point and he forgot to put the sand in. And so he starts pounding it, but there's just gunpowder in there. And because of the friction, there's a spark and the gunpowder explodes and the steel rod goes through his eye and through his brain up into the sky and comes down, and they see him and they think that he's dead, but take him to the hospital. He survives and he recovers. And he lived for another 12 years, in fact. But he had changed. And so there's something about the brain. And it went through the front part of his brain, which is the prefrontal cortex or the frontal cortex. I'm not an expert on brains. And so he became moody and used crude language which he had never used before. And people said that he was not the same Gage. He had lost his capacity to control himself, and so and this is all to say that our brains are malleable, and the things that we do to ourselves and that we put into our brains shape our brains, and for better or for worse. They call this plasticity. Not that the brain is plastic, but it's like moldable, and we can train our brain. And so, for one example, they have done autopsies of people over the last 100 years or so, and there is a measurable change in the size of the amygdala, which is one of the parts of the brain where you memorize things, apparently. And that is because we don't memorize things as much as people did 100 years ago, because we have calculators and we have Google, and we don't need to memorize like really long poems like people memorized. We probably should memorize them, but anyway, that's another story. But yeah, so we've changed our brains. And so like if I really love sports, kind of train my brain to kind of respond to like watching basketball, or if I really love Led Zeppelin, I kind of train my brain to, and it creates these pathways. And there's a battle for our attention. And these magical screens, or including this one, is battling for our attention. But what does it do to the brain when there is an incessant flow of content into the brain? This is something that's never happened before. And so because of the smartphones and the computers and everything else, this is a new situation. The gift of the book, of literature, is that it's the antidote to content. It's a sanctuary. It's like a freedom that where you can form your brain away from the dehumanizing enchantments of Netflix and video games and TikTok and Avengers movies. And I mean, those are all good things. I'm not saying don't watch those things, but we want space and we want contemplation away from the distraction industries. These are like powerful, superly rich industries, these tech companies, and they're spending that money to distract us and to get us to like look at their stuff. Dr. Philip Zimbardo, I think he's at Stanford, was interviewed. And he's talking about how the impact of gaming and TikTok cat videos these are so enchanting and captivating, and they get us focused on the screen. And this is having negative consequences. I mean, there's all kinds, you see in the news every day, more studies about the bad effects of too much screen time. And we have, so let's talk about the brain for a bit. So we've got these neurological systems and reward centers. And there's these reward centers in the brain, which are dopamine factories. And so what is dopamine? Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, and it sends signals from one nerve cell to another, and it creates this reward area and a dopamine pathway. And so when I'm listening to Led Zeppelin over and over and over again, like it gets me kind of more into that, like really easy to fall into pathway, like a groove, literally, to listen to that music. I'm grooving to that music. Well, that's going to happen with all these other things that I'm grooving to. And I mean, like take an addictive drug. If you a groove to an addictive drug, so like cocaine, methamphetamine, Adderall, other psychostimulants also create these powerful grooves and pathways that just keep you doing it over and over again. They pull you back into it. And that's like an addiction. Like if it's cocaine, it'll destroy your entire life. It'll kill you. Or methamphetamines. And so, but getting back to the dopamine generally, like it's a good thing. We need dopamine. It signals desirability or aversion. It's a motivator. It motivates me towards an outcome, like ice cream. Hey, I'm motivated, you know. And this powers the brain to want. And so we want to use dopamine correctly. We want to train our brain correctly so that we can live a full life. And then we've got the prefrontal cortex in the front. That was the part damaged in Phineas Gage, which regulates these reward-seeking structures. And like humans, one of the things that we have is unlike most other animals, is this big prefrontal cortex, and that gives us a capacity to reason beyond what most animals can do, and so we can weigh consequences, and we can think about, do I want to keep this drive in check? I can kind of start training myself, put on the brakes. Okay, I can sleep in until noon, but I want to stop that. I want to get up, or I want to eat this whole pizza. Like, oh no, I can put a brake on that kind of reward system. And then when you have an addiction, you've worn out the brake. So now you can't stop. And you're just compulsively binging, like Netflix or whatever it is. And the antidote to all this is reading books. I was going to say really long books. I mean, they could be short books too, but especially really long books. And The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky is a really long book, or Pride and Prejudice, or 1984, or The Road, or Dante's Divine Comedy, which is 14,233 lines long. Not counting all the notes, because you got to read the notes when you're reading Dante, because he's talking about all these medieval characters that we don't know about anymore. But yeah, these types of books are our sanctuary, our freedom, our antidote. life should be and is an adventure called forth to courage, loyalty, nobility. These distracting addictions pull us away from that. And so a book is going to open that all up to me again. And I'm forming the habit when I'm reading a book, a story of the Brothers Karamazov, a really long book, looking back at experience, contemplating wisdom, looking at the example of these people's lives. And that's going to feed my hope of what's ahead of me. Feed your hope. Feed it with books, really long books. And I'm going to take a sip over here. And what am I doing? I'm training myself to be still, to contemplate. And Aristotle said that contemplation, which means kind of just doing nothing except thinking, is the highest human thing. Theoria in Greek. It's all of my actions should serve contemplation, getting me to that point where I'm stopped and I'm just contemplating, just taking it and enjoying it. Not always going out, not always seeking something new, just in repose, within limits. This is what's going to nourish and sustain me. Not new goals and new buy this new gadget and take one life experience. Being a father or mother. And if you are a father or mother, if you know fathers or mothers who have a little child, that is the definition of being tied down. You can't go anywhere. There's like zero downtime. 24/7 with this baby. You are, but what a nourishing life experience that is of taking care of a baby and a toddler and a middle school and the high school, like the whole thing. Like that is the type of thing, is living within limits, rooting yourself in a family, in a place, in a culture, in your body, solid. That's what we need. And that's, how is this is kind of, doesn't seem like the books are going to help us with this, but they are. And so I think I'm going to go to the drawing board here and sketch this out on a little piece of paper, if I can get this to work, where we have being distracted and contemplating, to contemplate. And actually, before I get to that, let's see, do I have this little blank page here? Let me see for a second. Use this. Where I'm going to talk about a couple of terms here. One is liquefaction, turning things into liquid. Liquid modernity, which I've talked about elsewhere, which means having total mobility. I can go anywhere I want. I can cut my roots. I'm rootless. And I treat all nature as a standing reserve. This is a word, standing reserve, used by a philosopher named Heidegger, Martin Heidegger. He's a complicated figure, but a brilliant figure. We'll talk about him some other time, where he says that because of modern technology, we modern people tend in a negative way to treat nature as a standing reserve, just something that I can totally use. I'm basing it totally on its utility. So I take a river and I don't just see a river, I turn it into a hydroelectric plant, which is not in itself bad. But if that's my focus on the river and I'm not respecting the existence of the river as a river, then I destroy it, and I destroy the ecosystems around it, and I can do that to everything, including my own body. I turn it into a standing reserve where I can control. It's a fantasy of total control. And this is the human tendency to want to control. It's not a totally bad tendency. It's good we want to control our lives so we don't die of unnecessary diseases, and we use medicine so we can control medicines and so forth, control diseases through medicine and surgeries. Those are good technologies that we want to use, but when it becomes excessive, then you can't even live fully. Gosh, my allergies are acting up. Let me take another drink here. And so, for example, just thinking about dying, it's impossible to die now because we have so much technology and we're using like all these systems and breathing machines and everything else, and it's almost impossible to die. You almost have to like get pneumonia so that it just kills you. That's too much technology. I mean, we need to let our bodies do what they need to do, which is die and be born and reproduce. And so we need to respect the body, not control it totally. Okay, so that's just one example. And so this means living limitedly. I want to live within limits. Accept those limits. Don't see them as like something that's just dehumanizing me. No, that my body limits me, and that's good. That makes me human, and my roots to my place where I am, where I have a responsibility to my town, to my neighborhood, to my family, if I have children, and a spouse. Those are good limits. They allow me to develop fully. And a book limits you. It ties you down. It makes you, what's a book? It's the opposite of a distraction. It's a device that gets me to sit in one place for an hour or 2 hours. It demands a retreat from distraction. And so this is good when I'm reading Virgil's The Aeneid, a really long book from the ancient Romans, translated into English. I can't read it in Latin, where Aeneas is called forth to found the new city of Rome. He's got this mission, and he sacrifices himself, and he has to face natural disasters and shipwreck, and he falls in love. It seems at a certain moment, but he's called beyond that. He has to sacrifice that because he's called to go found the city of Rome, and he's got to fight for his country, and he sacrifices himself. And all of this story telling and my experience of the story of Aeneas, and it's a great story, breaks me open so that I can wonder. And so the distraction industries, they kind of cut you off. I mean, in a certain sense, you're full of wonder because you're enchanted by this device, but then that kills your capacity to wonder. It's almost like because you've destroyed your brake system, Like it's just like this like flow that you can't enjoy it. Whereas the book, it stops me. I've got to like sit there and read it for hours. Like, and it's even better than a movie. And movies are good too. They're great stories. But a movie, you can watch it in 2 hours. But a book takes like 20 hours, 30 hours. That type of slowness is crucial to developing my capacity to wonder. And wonder is the root of philosophy, of thinking, of contemplation. Or Beowulf, there's another story. Beowulf's called forth to face deadly enemies, a dragon and so forth. And he dies for his people in order to by killing the dragon. Or a modern story like Waiting for Godot, where these two men are waiting and nothing happens. It's a wonderful play where nothing happens twice, it says, or it is said, because basically they wait all day and then nothing happens. And then they wait the next day, nothing happens. Facing this kind of meaninglessness, facing this, thinking about suicide and really wrestling with the deep questions of existence and finding friendship. And friendship is ultimately what saves their lives. It's a beautiful story in the midst of real darkness. And so these are what books are going to do for us. And I have another chart. Let's see if I can find it here. Go back to the drawing board. And my allergies are acting up. I need to get some cough drops. But let's look at this. Let's think about being distracted versus contemplating and what they consist of, and how when I'm being distractive, it's saying, satisfy me now. And there's a place for that. Like, when you're thirsty, go get a drink. But if that becomes all I do, it becomes an addiction. Whereas the contemplating, this is retreating from distraction. I'm going to stop. I'm going to stay in one place. This person, when I'm in this mode, I can't sit still. I'm constantly looking for something new. I can't sit still. Whereas here, I'm sitting still. And when I'm sitting still, I cultivate my imagination and my ability to wonder. This one kind of kills my imagination. I mean, I'm kind of using it, but it's so overwhelmed. It's like oversaturated, and can't spell imagination. And then, so this is getting me on this side to wonder. And what about my sense of identity? If I'm fully distracted all the time, who am I? What's my identity? Well, these identities, let me spell this again, are kind of constructed. And identities are all kind of constructed, but there has to be a rooted identity to have a full sense of identity of who I am, a community, a place, rooted. And Karl Marx, the economist and philosopher, I don't agree with a lot of what he said, but he was really insightful here, where he talks about how global capitalism was going to make everything solid melt into air. All identities. And so what's going to form the identities? It's going to be consumerism that's going to form identities. It's just going to be, what do I buy? That's what's going to form identities. Consumerism forms identities. I mean, it's kind of ironic. I mean, it seems like it would be the opposite, but that's exactly people who are fully invested in getting that satisfy me now mode. They're surrendering to capitalism, because capitalism is this powerful set of images and values which are just going to overwhelm you, and that's what happens. They think they're free, but they're actually becoming slaves. And so this mode has no guardrails. And if you're driving on a highway with no guardrails, you're going to crash. Whereas if I have rails, I have institutions which serve as guardrails for like courtship, for dating, for celebrating, like what do I do at Christmas, for festivity. These institutions, they're kind of limiting me because they're set, and you know I can't change them all the time, but they free me because they're set. And so that is ironic, but it's true. And then we have what I'm going to call Gnosticism. Others have called this as well Gnosticism. This is this liquid modernity Gnosticism, which was an idea in the ancient world. I mean, I guess it's still around, but it's a hatred of the body, of the material world, because the body limits me. And so I want total freedom. And in the ancient world, there was a whole idea, and some Christians embraced Gnosticism, other like religions embraced Gnosticism, where they thought there was a lesser divinity called a demiurge, which made the material world, including our bodies, and the goal was to escape from our bodies and get to like an immaterial reality of heaven. But that's not a good idea. We need our bodies. These limitations save us. And so this is going to be accepting my body and my limitations, including my mortality. My mortality is a gift, and it makes life worth living, interestingly. So good. So that's my little chart. And so I want to say some more things about this cultivation of my imagination, of my power to contemplate, to wonder, and to be sensitive to beauty, to really enjoy beauty, and have a broader horizon. And this is like when I'm reading these books, Brothers Karamazov, Waiting for Godot, I see the lives of other people. I'm broadening my horizons. I'm growing my capacity to critically think. I'm growing my capacity to express myself. And I was talking to this friend of mine who was at an interview for graduate school. I'm in Houston, Texas, at the University of Houston. He was interviewing, and he was trying to get into the PhD program in psychology. And they invited the potential students to this interview, and then they had dinner with them to sort of see how they would talk. And my friend remarked that half the people had nothing to say. And they were very unimpressive. And like, whereas he's like, well, he can talk about things that he's read, and he can talk about characters in novels that related to certain issues, or some history book that he had read. And he kind of jumped out and he got in. I mean, whereas these other students didn't. You know, are you able to express yourself by telling stories, by having this storehouse of stories that's going to make you a much more interesting person to talk to? It's also going to improve my capacity to concentrate. Do I have trouble concentrating? Yes. I think a lot of us do. Having a book is exercising your contemplation. And I'm going to be able to have a wider friend group because I'll have more things in common with more different people, not just people who have like the same ideas as me to begin with, and the same cultural background, like people from China or India or South America. I mean, if I've read stories and novels that they've read, and we'll have that common ground. So we need to fight back to reclaim your attention, to develop into a contemplative, to cultivate my inner life. limit yourself, tie yourself down with deep, deep roots, with a book, with many books. And the image I'm going to end with is the tree. And my big hero, J.R.R. Tolkien, loves trees, and he even made trees characters in his novels. And he had friendship with trees. And the tree is this wonderful image of the rooted, stationary, contemplative being that just is there and just enjoys being and living and has a fulfilled, enriching life. And so that's what my goal is for you and for me, is to, through books, to become like a tree.